All right, so hello and welcome to today's National Carers Week Stakeholder Workshop on carer rights and complaints. And thank you very much for joining us at the end of National Carers Week, which has been a week full of events and activities to celebrate carers. Melissa, if you could please pop up that introductory slide, that would be great. Thank you very much. So my name is Sarah Judd-Lamb and I'm the Executive Manager, Policy Research and Projects at Carers New South Wales. And I'm pleased to be hosting this webinar today, along with my colleague at the Department of Communities and Justice, Tanya Smythe, who I'll introduce again in a little minute. And I just wanted to flag that today, in addition to recording the session so that people can watch this following, we are trying to use a few interactive features with Zoom, which you may or may not be familiar with. So one thing to flag is that many of you may be used to Zoom meetings where everybody can see each other and mute and unmute. You'll notice that we are using a Zoom webinar format today, which is a little bit different. So you'll be able to see and hear only the panelists, which is myself, Tanya, Melissa, and you'll see our slides. Those that are here today in an attendee capacity, we won't be able to see or hear you, but you will be able to interact in a number of ways. And as we only have an hour today, but we want to run a stakeholder workshop, we really do want to get your feedback and input. So be prepared to answer some questions, to contribute, and we will explain a little bit more how to do that. So I think we'll probably just start into the formalities of the run sheet and then we'll explain a little further how we're going to run things today. So if you go to the next slide, please, Melissa. So before we get started with the formalities of the stakeholder workshop today, it's very important that we first acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we are all dialing in from today. So for me in Epping, that is the Wallamedigal people of the Eora Nation. And I'd like to extend my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to the traditional custodians of the lands represented here today by those joining us, and to any First Nations carers that are joining us. Next slide, please, Melissa. So the focus of today's webinar is to provide a little bit of background on the Carer Rights Education Project, which we will tell you more about if you haven't heard of it before. And also to really get your feedback. So we have promoted this event as a stakeholder workshop. If we had planned this in times when everybody could be face-to-face, in a room around everybody with butcher's paper and feedback. So it's not going to be just me talking and Tanya talking today. We'd really like to get your feedback on a number. And so what we're going to do as part of that is actually sort of start from the beginning with that, just to get the ball rolling a little bit. And so I think if we go to the next slide, Melissa, we have, yes, some information there about interaction today. So what would be great is if you can, as some people are already doing, introduce yourselves in the chat function. So we have a hello there from Lucy. Hi, Lucy. Hi, Shanna. Hi, Charlotte. And please do add the traditional custodians of the land that you're on if you would like to. So number one on the slide there is to introduce yourself in the chat. And you'll see that there's another image there about polls. So I'm not sure if people are familiar with polls, but if you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, you will see information there about polls. And what should happen when I launch a poll, it should just pop up on your screen. So if you have any issues with that, just let us know in the chat. We've had a couple more introductions. Hello there from Michelle on Wongal land. Hi, Ethalia from Wollongong. Thanks for introducing yourselves. Hi, Amanda. Thanks for introducing yourself. So keep adding your names and your lands to the chat. It's great to hear from you. And so we will be running a few different polls. And the first one we're going to start with, just to warm everybody up and get everybody practicing, is actually and if I find my notes here, it's a getting to know you poll. So what I'm just going to do while everyone's introducing themselves, and hi others, Cecilia as well, thanks Melissa, I'm going to launch now a poll that just says getting to know you. And in addition to everyone introducing themselves, we'd really love to hear what role you're participating in today, as in today, because we've invited carers, we've invited service provider representatives, we've invited researchers, peak organisations. So while you're saying who you are and where you're from in the chat, I'm going to launch this poll, which should come up for you. And if that comes up on your screen, if you could just let us know, and you can choose more than one, whether you're participating today as a carer or another role. Oh, look at that. So we are getting some great responses. Thank you for that. So feel free to answer that poll if you can see it, just letting us know what capacity you're participating in today. Fantastic. Fantastic. I'll give everyone a little bit more time. And we really wanted to get a real diverse spread of people today, because this project is led in many ways by complaints agencies and by peak organisations, but at the same time, it's very much a project for carers. So it's very important to get carer feedback and feedback from those that are working with carers as service providers. We have some more introductions in the chat there. Hi from Helen. Hi, Kathy. Hi, Simon. Thanks for joining us. Hi, Karen. Hi, Peter. Great. We're getting lots of introductions there. Really appreciate you introducing yourselves. I know it can be a bit funny without the video. I think we've got quite a few responses there. So what I will do is end that poll, and then hopefully I can share the results with you so everybody can see that. So that's really helpful for us to know today who's in our audience. So we have, let's see, we have 7 carers, 2 former carers, 2 people from complaints agencies, 4 service providers, 3 peak organisations, and some others. So those that have said other there, feel free to add in the chat if you'd like what perspective you're coming from today. But as you can see, we have people from a range of different backgrounds that are with us today. So that's our first poll, warming you up. Thank you for participating. And we're going to go over now to Tanya Smythe, who's going to speak to us briefly about the New South Wales Carers Strategy, which is really important background in positioning what we're talking about today. So I'm pleased to introduce Tanya Smythe, who's the Director of Carers at the New South Wales Department of Communities and Justice. Thank you, Tanya.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Yes, so my name's Tanya Smythe. I'm the Director of Women New South Wales Seniors and Carers in the New South Wales Department of Communities and Justice. I'd firstly like to acknowledge that I'm meeting on the lands of the Gadigal, Gamaway and Wangal peoples of the Eora Nation. So Michelle, we must be somewhere very close. I'd like to thank Carers New South Wales for organising the this Carers Rights Education Workshop. It's part of many events that are being held for National Carers Week. I've talked to many of my stakeholders this week about all of the events, including the forum, and I've heard nothing but praise for Carers New South Wales over the last week. My only concern is how high the bar has been set for the rest of us, especially in regards to anyone has to deliver an online conference after the stellar job Carers New South Wales did last week. So now I'll just talk a little bit about the New South Wales Carers Strategy, Caring in New South Wales. The strategy was launched a year ago in 2020. It's a 10-year strategy, which is quite lengthy. So every 2 years, we'll be publishing a list of actions that supports the implementation of the strategy. And that will allow us to respond to current issues that are occurring rather than, trying to preempt that across a decade. The Carers Rights Education is an action in the first action plan, which is for 2020-2021. It's the action is led by both Carers New South Wales with support from the Department of Communities and Justice. So DCJ supports this important work as it's one of the cornerstones to supporting carers to be increasingly recognised, respected and empowered. When we completed or developed the new strategy, it was a co-design process. And a lot of carers through that process told us that they don't see themselves as carers. They often don't accept support when it's available or aren't aware of the support that's available. But in particular, they talked to us about being unaware of their rights as carers. Carers told us that being recognised, respected, empowered was really important to them. And that's, you can see that in our strategy. It's one of the 4 key priority areas. Carer recognition and respect is also underpinned by the New South Wales Carers Recognition Act. So the Act and the Charter that stems off from the Act It aims to raise awareness and recognises the role and valuable contribution of carers to our community and the people that they care for. And so this project that we're talking about here today builds on the work from the previous Carers Strategy and the work that was led by Carers New South Wales and DCJ to improve understanding and awareness of carer rights. The project is about working collaboratively with key complaints agencies, rights-based organisations and peak bodies to develop and distribute. The Carers Rights and Complaints Network has already done some really great work collaborating with those key complaints agencies and to develop a series of Know Your Rights fact sheets that explain the rights that carers have across a range of different service systems and how these rights can be upheld through making a formal complaint. So we think this work is really important to contributing to our goals in the strategy and to improve carer recognition and help them understand their rights by empowering carers to uphold rights and via the formal complaints processes and appeals pathways that are available to them. This work is really important to raise the awareness of the complaint sector regarding carer rights. And we're really excited to see this work continuing to develop through the strategy, see how it progresses in the future, and for us to work with Carers New South Wales to help reach as many carers as possible with this information. So I'll conclude there. Thanks, Sarah.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Tanya. And we will come back to a bit of a Q&A session later. So if you do have questions that you want to ask Tanya or myself, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen where you can log a question and you can put that anonymously if you want or publicly. So please feel free to ask questions throughout and we'll come back to them at a couple of specific points for discussion. And I can see we've had a few more people introduce themselves to the chat. That's fantastic. Please keep using the chat, and we understand that we thank you, Tanya, for your ringing endorsement of our online capacity. It's definitely been a baptism of fire for us, and I know sometimes patience is required from attendees with some of the online stuff not always working as intended, but we really thank everybody for their patience and also their enthusiasm, especially today in helping us through these online tools. So we can see from the chat already that we've got people from the aged care context, the disability services context, the immigration rights context, mental health peer workforce. We've got a real range of people today in addition to our carers. So I think that's really great and will make for some robust discussion and input, which is excellent. What we are going to do because we want to make this interactive and we don't just want to talk at you today, we want to actually, before we go into some more detail about the project, just give you a little taste of the kind of material that this project is covering so far. And so you may not have been prepared for a quiz, but I'm going to spring one on you. Hopefully it shouldn't be too hard and you won't be, punished for any wrong responses. It's just to get you to kind of interact with the kinds of material that we're presenting today. So we're just going to do, we've got 3 questions and they're just true or false questions. I'm going to pop up the first one now and just interested in seeing your response. Some of you may know the answer, some of you may not. Feel free to have a guess. So you should have a true or false question come up now on your screen. And that is true or false. There is a law in New South Wales that requires government services to recognise and support carers. True, false, don't know. What do you think? Getting some varied answers there. Fantastic. All right. So I think we've had everyone answer now. So I'll end that poll and I'll share results. They're anonymous. So just to give you a sense of what people have answered. So most people there have answered true and they would be correct. So I'll be talking about that in a little bit, but the New South Wales Carers Recognition Act does require government services to recognise and support carers. So some of you may have learned something new today and we will talk about that in a minute. Our next little poll that I want to run is another true or false question, I believe. And I will pose that now. So you'll see another one come up on your screen. This is a mental health related question. So our mental health stakeholders on today might be a little more across this one than others. The question says, true or false? Under the Mental Health Act 2007, a designated carer nominated by a patient should receive information about their condition and treatment plan. So in plain language, for those of us that are not used to the Mental Health Act, what we're asking is, do you think it's true or false that under a law, people that are caring for a mental health patient should be able to receive information? Oh, we've had a lot of answers there. So I'll show you what our answers have been. We've had a lot of trues. Can you see the results if I share them now? So you're all very well informed. It is indeed true that under the Mental Health Act 2007, a designated carer nominated by a patient should receive information about that person's condition and treatment plan. And so the purpose of us asking this question is really to show you that there's actually other laws in New South Wales that give carers specific rights in specific situations. And this project is partly about raising awareness of that. So one final test your knowledge question, since everyone's performing very well so far. This one is actually a multiple choice, so not a true or false. And this is along the lines of what I just said about there being other laws in New South Wales that do deal with carers' rights. So you'll see that one has popped up now, and the question is, which of the following laws create protections specifically for carers in the workplace? The Fair Work Act 2009, New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Act of 1997, and the Work Health and Safety Act 2011, or all of the above. So we're talking about protections specifically for carers in the workplace as opposed to other groups. Okay, we've still got some responses coming in. I'll let everybody finish. It's a tricky one. Great. All right. I think everyone's answered now. So very, very good stab, everybody. And really, I mean, most people are right in some way, shape or form. So the Fair Work Act 2009 does create some specific rights for carers in the workplace along the lines of carers leave and the right to request flexible work. We won't go into that today, but that is in our resources that we'll talk about if people want to follow that up later. The New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Act 1997 actually does contain some rights for carers about discrimination in the workplace on the basis of caring responsibilities. And once again, we won't go into the detail on that today, but that is in our resources on carers in the workplace. The Work Health and Safety Act does apply to all workplaces, but to my knowledge, unless anyone wants to correct me, there's not specific rights that are created for carers separate from other people in that. Oh, sorry, I'm just realized I'm not sharing the poll. Thank you, Kathy, for that prompt. You can see that now. And so the Work Health and Safety Act, I don't believe provides specific rights for carers in the workplace. However, it obviously creates rights for carers in the capacity as other workers within the workplace. And so those that chose all of the above, definitely a good guess, but what we're focusing on in our resources is those first two pieces of legislation. So there you go, you've learned something new today, many of you. And once again, as I said, we're not going today into a lot of depth about carers' rights today, but we do have resources that we'll talk about that go into depth on a number of these areas. So hopefully we've whetted your appetites a little bit to go down that rabbit hole later on, and we will share the link to that as well. So we'll come back to some other feedback options in a sec, but what we're going to come on to next, and I will just double check that I'm running to time. Yes, more or less. I'm just going to start and talk a little bit more about the Carer Rights Education Project. So thanks, Melissa, for that slide. So we talked about the New South Wales Carers Strategy before. Tanya introduced the strategy, which is very important. Another important piece of this puzzle is the legislation that I mentioned in our first quiz question, and that is the New South Wales Carers Recognition Act 2010. There is a federal act, a piece of Commonwealth legislation that is very similar, called the Carer Recognition Act 2010. We're not going to focus on that today just because we're looking at the New South Wales Carers Strategy, but there is actually legislation at state and federal level that requires government services and government agencies to reflect a number of key principles in their work around carer recognition and support. I'm wondering actually whether I will add, we had someone that was going to help with question moderation today who's had to not join us last minute. So we will add in a minute the link to the actual legislation. But for the moment, I'll just talk to you a little bit about it. So the objects of the Act were to create the Carers Charter, which is where these key principles are featured. and also to increase awareness about the valuable contribution that carers make in our community. The Act defines who a carer is in this context, and the definition of the carer is how we define carers at Carers New South Wales. So talking about family and friend carers that provide ongoing support to someone with a range of different conditions requiring care. It also established the New South Wales Carers Advisory Council, and it applies to all New South Wales public sector agencies. Thank you, Tanya. I would have had my handy sidekick to do that, but she's not present with us today, so thank you for that. So there's a link in the chat there, which I will just broaden to everybody. It's a link in the chat there to the legislation, and that is where you can find the full details, including the New South Wales Carers Charter. Mel, if you could please go to the next slide, that would be great. So here's just a little overview of the Carers Charter. It has a number of principles across 4 main areas, and these are the principles that government agencies are required to reflect in their work. So one is around the contribution that carers make in the community. Another is about carers' health and wellbeing being important. Another one is about carers' diversity and their own individual needs. And another one is around carers being partners in care. So again, if you want to have a look at the full charter, you can use that link that Tanya has provided. Really what we are doing in the Carer Rights Project, the Carer Rights Education Project, is related to the Act, but it's also related to a review of the Act that happened in 2016. So the Act started in 2010. It's then the Department of Communities and Justice, where Tanya works, and Carers New South Wales, where I work, has been really raising awareness of the Act among government agencies since 2010, trying to ensure that that government agencies uphold their obligations, and also that carers are aware of their entitlements under this legislation. But something that has always been a limitation of the Act, while it's a really great best practice guide for government agencies working with carers, is that it doesn't really create legally enforceable rights, and there's no formal complaints mechanism that carers can use if these principles aren't upheld in a certain situation. It's what's called an aspirational piece of legislation. So it provides best practice principles, but it's not the same as, say, the Mental Health Act, which we talked about before, where if something that's in the Act doesn't happen, you can go through a specific agency or tribunal to get it upheld. And so in our ongoing conversations as Carers New South Wales, the department, our feedback really was, we need to strengthen this legislation. There's a recognition that carers do have rights across a range of different laws, but they often aren't aware of them. And so in 2016, when the Act was reviewed, we provided this feedback. And one of the key recommendations that came out of the Act review, as you can see there, was around improving information for carers about the complaints and mechanisms that they do have access to. So while there's not a specific complaints mechanism linked to the Carers Recognition Act, there are a number of complaints mechanisms linked to other legislation that carers have rights in that they can use. And we spoke to complaints agencies that manage these complaints, and nearly all of them said to us, we hardly get any complaints from carers. Some of them said we're not even collecting data on that, but others said we really want more carers to use our complaints mechanism. So that really led to the development of the Carer Rights Education Project that we're talking about today. And that's a joint initiative between the department and Carers New South Wales. And it started off as something called the Carer Rights and Complaints Network. So we can go to the next slide, please, Melissa. So the Carer Rights and Complaints Network, or CRCN, started in late 2017, has had regular meetings since February 2018, and has brought together a range of complaints agencies and peak organisations to improve understanding and awareness among the complaints agencies and also among carers about the rights and complaints options that are available to carers under a range of legislation. And really our key goal was to eventually develop resources that would help carers navigate these complex systems. And our aim is to help carers to be able to uphold their rights that they have and rights that they can uphold, but often don't know how to or need support to uphold. You can go to the next slide, please, Melissa. We've had membership change a little bit over time. So because this project's been going since 2017, 2018, we've had some organisations join, some leave just because of other priorities, but our key members across that period are listed on this slide just for your information. So you can see we've got some New South Wales agencies, we've got some federal agencies from a range of areas, and we also have some peak bodies. And it's a really great, diverse spread of agencies, and we've had some really fruitful conversations. A number of our complaints agency participants have really said that their awareness of carers has grown, and that has impacted their agencies' dealings with carers. They've improved their data collection, they've improved their resources available to carers and their communication with carers. And then on the other side, we've had some really helpful input from rights-based agencies and peak organisations like Mental Health Commission and Legal Aid around some of the key sticking points for carers and where to get support in upholding rights. Next slide, please, Melissa. So the key thing that we really did as a network is to basically map what rights carers did have. So being aware that the Carers Recognition Act didn't link to a particular complaints agency, we wanted to get a thorough idea of what other laws exist that create specific rights for carers that can be upheld through formal complaints mechanisms. So with the network, we did this in a number of key areas that carers engage with, including those listed on the slide. So there's the obvious ones like service legislation around mental health services, disability and aged care services, but there's also a number of other areas that many carers wouldn't be aware of giving them rights, and that includes consumer law, also administrative law, employment law, and anti-discrimination law. So we learned a lot through this experience, and I think the stakeholders working with us did as well, about just how many rights carers do have in a number of areas. Next slide, please, Melissa. Just a little brief view of one of the early exercises we did. We also needed to map what the complaints agencies were that were linked to these pieces of legislation, and we needed to really clearly understand as Carers New South Wales who they were, what they could manage, what types of complaints they could manage, and how to contact them. Because as any carers that have attempted to make a complaint before will probably recognise, it's a very, very cluttered landscape. There's a lot of different agencies, some of them overlap. It can be really tricky to know who to contact about what and where. So we did that process with the complaints agencies that joined the network, and that was a very valuable exercise. We can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So what this resulted in, we did some mapping, and then what we were really, really passionate about doing, especially the department and Carers New South Wales, working with carers directly, was to distill this information into as plain language as possible, because complaints information is complex, but it's also often expressed in very complex ways. So we worked very hard for a long period of time with our partners on the network to distill that information into a series of fact sheets. And that was 8 fact sheets, and we were very firm on them being maximum of 2 pages. Everyone had to have a case study. The language had to be as clear as possible. And we really only wanted to show the best first point of contact information, because often when you look at complaints information, there's a lot of detail about who can deal with what, and there may be different options. What we said to our complaints agencies on the network was, we really need to know if there's one number that you would give carers to ring, and from then on they can be provided with support through the process, what is that number? And so we were really happy with the result, and were able to get this information into as short a format as we could. And even though the information is complex, really try and drill it down to the main facts. So we presented those fact sheets in Carers Week last year, and those are available at the link that Melissa has provided in the chat. And so the next slide you'll see is my last slide before we hand over to you all for some more feedback. We also did some webinars. So in 2021, we did monthly webinars to correspond with each of those fact sheets. So 8 fact sheets, 8 webinars, and those webinars finished last month. They're all recorded and available on YouTube, which Melissa has provided the link to in the chat. And really the idea of that was our complaints agency partners wanted to potentially go into a little bit more depth about some of these topics. We also wanted to provide the information in an alternative format for people that prefer an audiovisual format where they can ask questions. And we also wanted to have an additional resource that we could share with people about this topic. One thing that was really helpful as well about the webinar format was that we actually could introduce carers that were watching to people from those complaints agencies. And I think that became a really important element of the webinars, because it put a face to the complaints agencies. And these complaints agencies often have really engaged community outreach teams that are friendly and approachable, and we're able to say, this is who we are and you can access us. So they're the resources that we had happen. And if we go to the next slide, Mel, so we might, let's go to Q&A quickly, and then I'll come back to the next poll, which is getting your thoughts on some of these things. So I think we've had some comments in the chat around a number of areas. So thank you for those that are engaging there. I did mention that my moderator for questions is not available today at last minute, so I'm going to just have to have a look myself, which is fine, but just please bear with me. So I think we had a question. Let's have a look. We had a question about whether the slides will be available. So we are recording today. So I think what we'll do is just distribute the recording rather than the slides, just because that's a bit easier to send around. But we will send through all the information that is we've referred to, including links. Okay, I've got the question. So someone asked, how does this work sit alongside prevention and early intervention work to raise awareness among government, service providers, workplaces, so they protect and don't breach carers' rights? And what ongoing work is there to reduce the need for carers to make the complaints in the first place? So that's a really, really good question. I guess to summarise, the question is, are we doing anything about raising awareness in the sector to make sure that they don't breach carers' rights? And are we doing anything to resolve the issues that cause complaints? So I guess to first answer from Carers New South Wales perspective, yes and yes. So the Carer Rights and Complaints Network itself is specifically around information to support carers accessing complaints. One of the side effects of this project was actually raising awareness of those complaints agencies around carers, which has helped in improving processes. But in terms of addressing this information to the sector and to addressing some of the issues that cause complaints in the sector, while that's not the core business of the network, it's very much core business for Carers New South Wales policy team. And as the peak organisation for carers in New South Wales, funded by the department for this purpose, we definitely do a lot of systemic advocacy around the issues that are leading to complaints. And so one other thing that maybe Melissa can share in the chat is our policy team's contact information, because when you have an issue, you might need to resolve that on an individual level through a complaints process or through individual advocacy, which is not something that we do, but the complaints agencies and people like Legal Aid and Seniors Rights Service do. So there's that individual process which this project is talking about. But when something is a system issue that's affecting a lot of people, that is something that we invite you to raise with Carers New South Wales policy team, because we write submissions and we provide feedback on these issues. And Melissa has put our email address there. And so we're definitely doing a lot of that. If you want to contribute to that or find out about that, you're welcome to contact us. Was there anything you wanted to comment, Tanya, around the sort of raising awareness of the sector?
Yep, definitely. So we also have there's a grants program called the Investing in Carers Investment Program. And so a lot of the, we can send a link around of all of the current projects. There were many projects that were looking at that awareness raising around carers. I think the last week has been huge in terms of that raising awareness of carers. So the Minister himself has done a lot of work this week around talking to his colleagues. There's been a really large social media campaign on our social media sites. We also have a council, so it's a ministerial advisory council, and the CEO of Carers New South Wales is actually a member of that council. And so they meet a minimum of 4 times a year, and a lot of the issues that they talk about is that recognition of carers. And in terms of the Act, the other thing that the department does is with other government agencies, they're all required to provide reports around how they're meeting the requirements of the Act. And then even with local councils, we compile information from their annual reports around their, the activities they've done around carers and what their awareness is and how it features in the work that they do. So that's just a few of the things that are happening at the moment.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tanya. And I can see we've had a few comments in the last sort of few minutes around the difficulties in aged care providers and NDIS providers not really recognising the carer separate from the care recipient or the person that's receiving services. And also another comment specifically around providers and professionals not recognising even formally appointed roles like enduring guardian, which carers may have. And so definitely we recognise that those issues, and we advocate a lot on those issues as Carers New South Wales policy team. And in fact, we had a webinar last night as part of Carers Week on supporting carers in those kinds of formally appointed decision-making roles. So those are things we're very aware of, and that definitely forms a huge part of our ongoing advocacy about those sectors. And I know a number of people that are online today are also involved in that ongoing advocacy and research around raising awareness of the importance of carers being recognised in their own rights in those service systems. And bringing it back to the Carers Recognition Act and the federal version of that, the Carer Recognition Act, while those pieces of legislation don't have enforceable legal rights, what is great about those pieces of legislation is that they give us a platform as a peak organisation to speak to all government-funded services and agencies, including the NDIS, or the NDIA, I should say, including My Aged Care, including hospitals, including GPs. They give us a platform to say to those providers when we are advocating, and for carers to say when they are individually advocating, that actually this set of principles around carers being recognised and supporters is something that those providers should be following. And so in many cases, when providers are made aware of that, they will actually change their practice. And so I think, while that doesn't kind of enable a carer to go to a tribunal on a particular issue, it really is an ongoing exercise of raising awareness of service providers. And we've seen positive change over time as part of that, and as part of DCJ's raising of awareness as well. So we have another question that's come through. If carers who work with the New South Wales government are experiencing discrimination in the workplace, where do they raise their complaints? So this actually came through in another presentation we did on this topic. And so what, I guess, for people's context, government employers under the New South Wales Carers Recognition Act do actually have some obligations around carers that are working with them. And so this one, I guess, is more to do with a workplace type scenario. I don't know, Tanya, if you wanted to say anything to that or whether you wanted me to respond.
Yeah, I mean, definitely approach your human resources area in your own department, but we'd also be happy to hear about your issues. DCJ, I'm very lucky, is incredibly supportive of carers. So DCJ's just acquired level 2 status in the employee recognition program. I've got the name wrong there, Sarah. I'm sure you correct me. And basically that was a lot about thinking about carers and around flexible working conditions and support for carers. So a lot's changed even just in our department, and given we're responsible for carers, so it should. But there's a big difference now to where we were about 5 years ago. So I'd even encourage you to approach your own human resources and let them know that DCJ has been through that process. And your own HR department can contact ours to talk about how we managed to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think with workplace issues, like Tanya said, it sort of depends on the workplace, but both DCJ and Carers New South Wales are interested in particular workplaces where this is a problem, because we can then, potentially look at how that awareness can be raised. But there's the requirements under the New South Wales Carers Recognition Act, which if you're in that situation, it's worth reading and then maybe showing them to see what their response is, because there are those basic obligations. But then on top of that, like Tanya said, there is also the best practice incentive. And so the Carers and Employers program, which is what Tanya was referring to, and maybe Melissa, if you could pop a link to the Carers and Employers program in the chat as well, that would be great. The Carers and Employers program that DCJ also funds Carers New South Wales to run is really about working with those employers who do want to go above the requirements as well in terms of being carer inclusive. So we've had a number of government agencies and departments in that process. And as Tanya said, DCJ is really leading the way in that, which is fantastic. And that's around having carer-friendly policies and things like that in place. So definitely look at the Act requirements, look at the Carers and Employers program. And I think, like any workplace issue, it's around having those conversations. But again, if you really think it's a systemic problem in your employer, raise it with the department, raise it with us. And that's something that we can look into. So thank you for that, Melissa. Just being aware of time, I want to make sure we can get some more of your input. So if you have questions, you'll have maybe some time later, please use the Q&A function for that. We are now going to do another poll, I think. So what is our next slide, Melissa? Just remind me. Can you just flick to the next one? Yes, fantastic. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is just remind you we've done these. Just go back actually, please. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So I spoke about the resources that we did before. I mentioned that we have fact sheets and webinars. What I'd just be really interested in gauging quickly is how many of you that are online today are aware of those resources, have used them. So I'm just going to pop a poll up and hopefully you'll see that. And it's just got two questions. The first is, have you heard of the fact sheets and webinars I've been talking about before, or is this your first time hearing about them? And then the second question is, if you have accessed one or more of the fact sheets and webinars, were they helpful? And I guess what were the areas that they were helpful in? So if you can just take a moment to have a look at that, that'd be really, really helpful for us for the next part of the discussion. Great, so some responses are coming through there. Fantastic. Fantastic. Great, getting some more responses. Fantastic. All right, oops, still got some coming through. Okay, I might end it there and I'll just share you the results with you so you can have a look. This is really, really helpful information. So as you can see in question one there, it looks like we've had, so about a third of those on today have actually looked at these fact sheets and websites before. Quite a few, so just over half, have heard of them but not used them. And then some haven't heard of them before today. So that's great because we want people to learn about them for the first time. And we also want to get some feedback from those that have used them. Then looking at our second question around those people that have used them. So it looks like the most common outcome of using those was around better understanding the rights of carers, which is a big tick for us. That is really the aim of the Carer Rights Education Project. So that's fantastic to hear. Looks like there's been some people that felt more confident about making a complaint and a couple that were able to follow through on making a complaint as a result, and then one that had supported a client. So that's great. And I think this is the kind of stuff that we really want to be seeing happening out of the project and why we continue to raise awareness. So what I wanted to get your feedback on next was actually around topics. So as you can see up there, I've included the topics that were covered in our 8 fact sheets and webinars. And we looked at the common settings that carers may experience issues for these resources. And they were aged care, disability, healthcare, mental health care, Centrelink, employment, and finances. And these were just the 8 topics that we decided on as a network were a priority, had a number of rights and complaints options available to carers, and that would be worthwhile doing resources on. So that's the topics that we have covered pretty thoroughly so far. But what we are wanting to do, so Tanya mentioned earlier the Carers Strategy and the Carer Rights Education Project. We've spent, a number of years working on these first resources. We've kind of come to the end of that first project. And so what we're looking to do under the Carer Rights Project now is expand. And the reason that we're having this, this consultation today is to get some different input on where to next. So one of the issues that we want to consult you on is what topics next. And then we'll have some other kind of areas of input later. So if we can go to the next slide, Melissa. these are some of the topics that we've been adding to a list over the last 2 or 3 years as carers have raised this, as our network has raised this. So we are still looking at firming up what our next priorities will be under the Carer Rights Education Project. But some of the things that have come up as priorities so far are carer services, reporting abuse, financial rights, education, renting and tenancies, recruitment, former carers, justice, and immigration. I've seen one suggestion come through on the chat, which is great. So if there are topics that are not here that you think we should consider, feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll be taking note of these. So we've had a couple of people mention accommodation, and that has come up, as you can see, on our list, but definitely we'll be looking at that as a possible option. Does anyone else have topics that are not in that list? And maybe, Melissa, if you can flick back to the last slide as well, just so people can refresh their memory about what's already covered. So these are the topics on the slide that we've already covered to a certain level of detail, although there may be details missing there that you want to highlight. If you want to go back to the second slide, these are the topics that we are considering looking at. And so feel free to pop anything that's not appearing there into the chat and we'll add it to our list. So financial support for young carers has come up. That's great. We've talked about doing some more young carer specific resources. Thank you for that, Lucy. Discrimination as a carer has come up. Thank you for that. We've actually spoken with our anti-discrimination members. So we've got Anti-Discrimination New South Wales and the Australian Human Rights Commission have been very, very active members of the Carer Rights and Complaints Network and are experts in this area for carers. And we actually have agreed with them that we will do some additional resources on discrimination. So that's a great kind of confirmation of that from the chat. Support for carers with disabilities, chronic illness. Yep, fantastic suggestion. So carers with their own support needs. We've also had Centrelink eligibility entitlements and cutoffs. So we do actually cover a fair bit of Centrelink in our existing fact sheets and webinars. So it would be worth checking those first, but we recognise that there's a lot of additional information that could be covered. And I can recommend to those interested in Centrelink the webinar on Centrelink. We had someone from the Welfare Rights Centre present who just presented on so much information and to have a look at. Because I think some of those things may already be covered. We also had a bit of something understanding around service users versus carer voices. Great idea. I think that really plays into the Recognition Act kind of principles, the Carers Charter. We've had the suggestion of abuse. So yep, that's definitely on our list. And while we do mention abuse briefly in a few of the fact sheets with respect to the Ageing and Disability Commissioner contact, it is something that we want to do some more information on. Financial support for grandparent carers is another suggestion. Interestingly, Liam, we've had some conversations with some other stakeholders recently about grandparents as well. So that's a really useful suggestion. Feel free to keep adding suggestions there. What I'd like to do now is just do a bit of a poll on some of the key options that we're looking at exploring. So just to get a sense of your priorities. So I'm going to launch this poll, and this is asking, could everybody choose just three, out of the list that we've provided that would be your top priorities? So if we were going to run with any of these as our next one, which three would you think should be prioritised? And then we're going to have a look at where people's thoughts are lying here. So just choose three for this purpose, if you can. And we probably will do them all at some point, but just interested in what is the most pressing at the moment. Great, and there's responses coming in. Thank you for that, excellent. Very helpful, can see some more responses coming in. That's fantastic. Great. All right, so I might just end that there so we can all see responses so far. So as you can see, looks like the most popular ones there are on accessing carer gateway services, which we already have one in draft for, and reporting abuse or neglect, which has come up a number of times as well from our network. So that's great. And then it looks like our close third is actually on education, which I know we've had discussions with Anti-Discrimination New South Wales about. So those top three, I think, are really viable for getting onto very quickly. And also very close following that, we have when a caring role ends and sort of the tenancy accommodation area. So that's really, really helpful. Thank you for that. That will help us determine what we focus on next. It's really, really great that everyone's engaging so well with these polls. We really appreciate it. We've had someone else comment about respite. That's definitely an area we've worked on and we can integrate here. And we've had someone comment about partnerships with universities for opportunities, definitely something we're looking at as well. So what I think we were going to cover next, let me just double check my polls here. Sources of information. So something else that's really important for us to get your feedback on is how would you actually want this information presented? We spoke about how we will do, currently we have fact sheets, which are available online as PDF downloads, which can be shared or printed. We also have the webinars, which present the information in a more audio-visual format. So what we really want to know, and I'll do a little poll on in a sec, is the forms of information, and that's for existing information or new information in this project. So I'm going to launch another poll now on sources of information, which should come up on your screen. And that says, which of the following ways are most effective for communicating rights and complaints information to carers? And so we've got a few options there. You can pick more than one. So just pick the ones that you think are best for carers. If you're a carer, that's what you would like to use. If you're working with carers, just your top picks for the best formats of information on these kinds of rights areas. Keeping in mind as well that the point of these resources is to provide straightforward information for a carer-specific audience to encourage them to make complaints. And while people are responding to that, we've had a comment in the chat around it's important to make sure that these resources are culturally sensitive. Definitely something that has come up before. And so I can mention, while this is the answers are coming in, that with the fact sheets that we did consult with, for example, the Aboriginal working group under the New South Wales Carers Strategy, and made sure that we had some information from them around suggested other topics. We have also looked at translation, and that's something that's in our potential work plan as well. Liam, I'm sorry that you can't see the poll there. Sorry about that, but you can feel free to post your thoughts in the chat if you like. I'm going to end the poll now and share the results. So hopefully most of you can see that. And it looks like fact sheets are still on top, which is a relief because that's what we have done so far. So that's a good confirmation. And online information as well, which is great. Looks like webinars are pretty popular there. Maybe some videos would be something we can explore. Yep, okay, great. So we've got some ideas for some of those other formats, and that'll really help us in our next steps as to the formats we put this information into. Fantastic. So again, being conscious of time, I want to make sure we maximize your input as well. I think our next area we wanted to get information on was about this project, the future of this project. So one moment. I'm talking a lot, so I need to have a glass of water. If you go to the next slide, please, Melissa. So changing gear a little bit. We've gotten a whole lot of information from those of you today on what should we do resources on, how should we do these resources, and what are some of the kind of issues of interest. What we would really like to do now is ask you whether any of you that are here today would like to be involved in an ongoing way in this project. Excuse me. So I mentioned that so far we've had a formal network or working group that has worked to develop these resources. We've also had less formal connections with some other people in the sector about getting them right. What we really want to know now is what next for the future. So before this consultation, we actually met online individually with each of our involved members organisations, and we consulted with them about what they viewed as the next priorities, what their ongoing engagement was. But what's become clear to us is we need to just sort of retool this network a little bit to make sure that we've got the right people involved, and that we, can have clear kind of levels of involvement from different groups so that we can get good input and make sure that the resources are going to be appropriate. One moment. Excuse me. So you'll see on that slide there, and this is still a work in progress, what we would love to end the webinar with is hearing from all of you that are here. So we've got 21 attendees, which is fantastic. Do you want to stay involved in this project? You don't have to. If you're just interested in finding out today and having a say, that is completely fine. But what we do want to get a sense of is whether some of you might like to be really involved, or whether some of you might like to be sort of involved in a medium way, or whether there's some of you that just want to stay in touch. So on the slide there, you'll see that we've sort of put forward 3 options that you might resonate with. And I should specify as well, you've seen that these polls are anonymous. So we're not saying that those of you that work for organisations have to commit right here, right now to being in a certain role. Not at all. We will seek that input later on a more specific level. What we want to do is just get a bit of a kind of gut response, initial response from those of you that are online about what your appetite is for ongoing involvement on this topic, so that we have a sense of where to go next. So one way that you might want to be involved is just in a more kind of marginal, more passive way, just getting updates, which is completely legitimate. So if you would be interested in staying informed about the project, so hearing about the new resources, where you can access them, what's happened, but with no expectation that you do anything about it other than use them, that's an option, staying informed. Another option that's a bit more involved is if you are someone that actually would be interested in participating in more events like this, where you can provide input, provide feedback, whether it's in a meeting or a survey or some other way. If you would like to actually have some involvement in that content being developed and some influence over the direction of this project, that's another level, which we're calling engaged. And then the third level is people that really want to be hands-on. And we know that a number of our existing network members are in this category already. So we've already got a small group that's in this, this close working relationship. But we want to make sure we extend that to others as well. So if any of you today really would like to be involved in a kind of sleeves up, hands-on way about really working through and helping develop some of this content and the direction of the project, we've named that delivery partner. And I should also give a shout out to some of our network members whose own activities have helped us to determine these levels. So thank you particularly to the Join Network, who have done a recent exercise like this as well. So what I'm going to do now is just put up a poll on this. And again, it's not a commitment, it's just an initial response. For those of you that are able to see the polls, which should be coming up now, and for those of you that can't see the polls, I can see some of you have said that on the chat. Feel free to put in the chat what level of involvement you might be interested in, because the poll is just the same options as the slide. So in the poll or in the slide, how many of you would be interested in just receiving email updates every few months? How many of you would be interested in just or in a bit more involvement in participating in other meetings like this, maybe giving feedback on drafts, participating in surveys? How many of you really think I want to either stay involved or become involved in that really hands-on way, helping to develop these resources and this project? So we've had quite a few answer. Fantastic. So I will end that there because I know some people are having trouble looking at the polls. I'll share the results just so you can see. We've got a pretty even split, which is great. So we have some that would like to stay informed, some that would like to be more engaged, some that would like to be delivery partners, which is fantastic. And so what we'll really want to do following this is to, at some point, really, I guess, go out to all of you that have attended today so that you can tell us that in a more formal way. And then if you need approvals from your employer and things like that, we can get that happening. But it looks like we've got a really good core group of some people that are happy to really be on board with us into the future in this area, and that's fantastic. So I think as it's nearing the end of the webinar, I'm just going to check whether we had any other things we wanted to get your feedback on. I guess we did have one more poll, and that was really just to get your feedback on today and what you've felt about today. So before we officially wrap up, I'm going to pose this one to you for those that can see the polls. And again, if you can't see the polls, feel free to post your thoughts in the chat. We really wanted to know, first of all, was this webinar useful? Did you learn anything? We know some people on here know a lot about the project, others may not know anything. So just really useful for us to know what that impact was. it's our first time using live polls in this way, and we know it hasn't worked for everybody perfectly, but we really just are interested in whether this kind of use of polls might be good in future webinars. So if you want to provide your feedback there by the poll or in the chat, that would be really helpful for us. And thank you for that. I will end that poll and show you the results. That's great. Some people learned some stuff. That's fantastic. And it looks like the polls were more or less a success. And again, apologies to those who weren't able to use them. I am going to then probably wrap up now because it's past. I'm available to stay on to answer questions if there's people who asked questions who would like them answered. But anyone else that needs to leave the meeting now is completely welcome to, because obviously we've reached our time. But I just wanted to wrap up by particularly thanking Tanya for joining us today and speaking on behalf of the department and for the department's ongoing partnership in this really important project under the Carers Strategy. And I wanted to thank as well everybody that is online today, and especially for your participation in the polls. That's been really, really helpful. And we will send you more information and as well some ways that you can get and stay involved with this project. So happy National Carers Week, everybody. I will hang on the line to answer some questions now, but we can officially close today's webinar.
Thanks, Sarah. Fantastic.
Thanks, Tanya. Are you happy to stick around for a few minutes or you need to jump out?
No,
okay.
I'm happy to stick around.
Fantastic. So I think we have some more comments and questions coming through. So we will keep recording so that we can put this up. Okay, let's have a look. Oh, great, some great feedback coming through. I'm going to save that chat so we have the access to everybody's comments. So have we missed any questions here? So I guess another comment came through around the HR element and the difficulty of, you know, having maybe HR departments that are not super flexible and wanting some better, some more changes in that context to help. So I think that point's absolutely taken. And again, I think if you haven't raised that with our policy team, we'd be happy to have a chat with that, just about why it's happening, where it's happening. There may be some suggestions that we can make about that. But yeah, not all employers are doing great in this area. I think we're seeing some that are really leading the way, but recognise that it can absolutely be a challenge. So someone has asked how they can contact us directly after today's session. So whether I beat Melissa to it or not, I'm going to put this in the chat. And actually, Melissa, if you can put it on the last slide, I think my contact details are there, or our contact details are there. Yep. So I've put the policy email in the chat. That's for the Carers New South Wales policy team. And we are the ones that sort of coordinate the carer rights education project in partnership with the department. And we also do systemic advocacy. So if you want to share an experience or ask a question about these rights areas we've talked about or about the resources, you're welcome to email us there. The Carers New South Wales office phone number is also, I'm going to put that there as well. So you're welcome to call our policy team too. What else did we come through? Some good feedback. Thank you all for that. Anything else that I've missed? Feel free to pop additional questions in the chat or Q&A now if you're hanging around also. Someone asked, can there be mail outs for those not online? So I think if Michael asked that, I'm not sure if Michael is still there, because the fact sheets are PDFs, they can technically be used as hard copy resources. One limitation with that is that we wanted to make them as simple and interactive as possible for the online format. So they do have direct links to complaints websites, but we purposely included the phone number as well, so that if they're used as printed resources, that's still achievable. So yes, we can print and send, but I think the person that asked that question has dropped off. So we might email him directly about that. That is possible. And you can also download them yourself and print them if that's helpful for those that you're working with. I think we've addressed all of the other comments and questions. Is that right, Melissa? Tanya, have you seen anything I haven't seen that we need to address?
No, I think there was a comment earlier up around complaints around housing, and then I think further down we talked a bit about accommodation options.
Yes, so definitely that's on our list of possible topics, which is great. And what we can do as well is update this group that has attended today on the next steps of where we're going with it. And we will get in touch around those different levels of engagement. So we'll TBC as to how exactly we do that. We might just kind of get a little survey or something where people can put in their details about that. And we had another comment come through. When a carer goes to Carer Gateway with an issue, are they redirected if applicable? That's a really good question. And I mentioned before that we've worked on a draft fact sheet around carer services through Carer Gateway. So really good question on 2 counts. So to answer that question, I guess number 1, if someone goes to the Carer Gateway, are they redirected? So it kind of depends, I think, on the Carer Gateway provider and the person that you're speaking to and what their expertise is on a certain area. Because as you can probably see from this project, this is a really huge area. There's a lot of detail. I think we've learned a lot as Carers New South Wales, but I wouldn't want to guarantee that any one carer support officer would know all of this information and where to refer people. So within our own, Carers New South Wales provides Carer Gateway services in one part of New South Wales. We certainly make these resources available to our Carer Gateway team so that they can refer to them and send them to carers where appropriate. I think, again, raising awareness among Carer Gateway service providers is a really helpful way of getting this information out there. I think some Carer Gateway providers refer to Carers New South Wales with these questions, which we're happy to respond to because we provide that information statewide. So I think depending on the Carer Gateway service provider, they may give you a recommendation on complaints, they may not. On the second area of whether the Carer Gateway rights and complaints and how that happens, there is actually information on the Carer Gateway website about that. But if you have a complaint about a Carer Gateway service provider, there's also a process. And so that is on the Carer Gateway website under website feedback. And if you have any questions about that process, you're welcome to contact our policy team and we can talk you through that since it's not on our public feedback yet. So have we had any other questions come through?
I think Liam was just pointing out it wasn't so just about rights around housing, it was a need for housing assistance.
Yes, right. Thank you for picking that up. And Liam, perhaps if you contact our policy team using the information, I'll repost that again now, but we're happy to have a further chat to you about what specifically you would like to know or whether we can point you in the right direction. So I'll just put that in the chat again today. Yeah, we're happy to just kind of get an idea of what the issues are that you're facing and maybe recommend where you could go on that. Because again, some of these areas where we haven't got fact sheets yet, but we do have that information so we can point you in the right direction. Any final questions or comments before we wrap up? Oh, great. We have a delivery partner, someone that would like to be a delivery partner. That's excellent. Really excited for this next phase. All right, well, we might then wrap it up there. And again, we'll be in touch and thank you for everybody's participation today.